Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Hightower Westchester, the Hightower Westchester program here on Westchester Talk Radio. I'm Bob Marone. First up, he is, of course, Roman Ciosek, Managing Director and Partner here at Hightower Westchester. Let's dive right in, Roman. This is interesting stuff. Are annuities right for you? There are many baby boomers, planning retirement. I've been one of them. I'm sure one of the challenges that you see is making sure that they do not outlive their assets. My understanding is that annuities are a consideration many retirees have thought about. Can you explain a bit more as to what you are saying?
Hey, Bob, thanks. And nice seeing you as always. And thanks for having us on.
Always a pleasure.
So it's certainly annuities have become an important part of the overall financial planning process. And again, we look at it through that lens, right? Is it what's ultimately best for our client? For us, it's really creating an overall customized solution to fit our clients' needs. And annuities, although they are a smaller part of our overall practice, we feel they've become another talking point as interest rates are creeping back up here. So for us, and sort of the message that we're trying to get across is it's important to understand what they are and more importantly, what they're not. And for many, I think, I'm sorry, but just one other thing, if I may, just, and again, the landscape has changed significantly, right? I mean, from years ago, people had pensions and that was something that helped individuals when they were looking for retirement planning. Those particular things, unfortunately, are not as relevant as they have been, although there is some semblance of them coming back. And Social Security, right? That's another avenue of where retirees were thinking about supplementing or complementing their overall income. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of debate, and we could certainly have a podcast on that in and of itself, but whether it's going to stay here, whether it's going to be reduced. So for us, it's really the annuity part of it is to supplement one's income and to really diversify a portfolio and mitigate the overall longevity risk, which is important.
I think it's fair to say it's one part, perhaps, of a larger plan, if indeed it is incorporated. Is that not true?
It is. That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we get to the baseline then? Explain to us what an annuity is and how they work.
Okay. So annuities, although the term for some that it's kind of a positive, or to some it's a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. Annuities, let's just say, are complicated. They're complicated instruments, and we view them as a longer term type of an instrument. But before anyone buys one, they need to really understand the pros and cons for them. So let's just dive into as to what an annuity is. And it's quite simply, it's a contract with a private entity, such as an insurance company, where the consumer deposits a certain amount of money to the insurance company, which that insurance company then invests those funds in turn. And the consumer ultimately gets paid in some longer term time frame, depending on what type of benefit they determine those funds, right? And again, it's a matter of customizing it, because at times that stream of income doesn't necessarily come to fruition. Certain people take the annuities out, or they treat it like an IRA where they take out partial distributions. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's really understanding the client's needs behind it.
Now, my understanding is that there are two types. One is immediate, the other is deferred. Can you explain the difference for our listeners and viewers?
Sure. So that is true. I mean, the immediate annuity is if you need income right away, and right away, I mean, it's a relative term, but that is really the option you would choose if you were to need income. This works similarly to, and again, it's different, but to a pension plan. You pay a lump sum of money to an insurance company, and in return, you receive a guarantee from them, that insurance company, a stream of income for the duration of that contract, depending how long that is. There are different types of immediate annuities to choose from, so you should really understand and research as far as the different options offered. Whereas a deferred annuity, there is a more of a specific time frame in which you will need the funds. So in this particular case, you have to look at the desired option as to what ultimately you need it for. But if deferred annuity, the income payments are delayed for a certain amount of time. And this depends on what time you choose. It could be immediate, it could be 1 year, 10 years, or longer, as the funds do grow for future benefits. But with deferred annuities, the funds grow tax deferred until withdrawn, right? So they basically keep accumulating similar to an IRA, those funds. And once the funds are taken out, the appreciation, which almost all of the time comes out first, is taxed as ordinary income.
Okay, I'd like you to stress something for us here. It's only the interest and the appreciation, if you will, the capital gain, that's taxed, not the principal.
Yeah, that's a
people
fair
would
point.
worry that if I'm drawing X amount of money out, it's important for them to understand what is principal and what is appreciation for their tax planning as well. Would that not be a fair statement?
That is correct, Bob. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of fair to say is this goes beyond sort of the conversation, but the tax implication of it is making sure we're kind of swimming into the direction as far as what your needs are. Because you're right, if you put a certain amount of money in, it's last in, first out. The amount that's kind of goes in as far as the appreciation comes out first.
I see.
But to your point, the principal is not taxed.
Okay, so and this is just such a reminder why you need to look at everything, not just any one thing. Now, give us some examples of deferred annuities, if you would.
Sure. So there are really three different types of deferred annuities that we look at. We looked at a fixed annuity, we looked at a variable annuity, and also index annuity. So a fixed annuity, just quite simply, this option has the least amount of predictability. But it's suited for more conservative type of investors. Mm-hmm. These annuities really provide a consumer with a guaranteed form of underlying insurance and income with a specific amount of duration and accumulation as well. And during this accumulation phase, the interest in the account, again, is tax deferred. But once the accumulation phase is over, the payout phase, which essentially means that you will start receiving income from that annuity. And again, once this annuity does mature, there are options as far as how to take those distributions out, whether it's on your life, whether it's on your on second to die. So there are various different options. I think some of the cons or the negatives here are that it's fixed. There are fees in here. There are commissions as well, which ultimately cut into returns, and loss of flexibilities and penalties if there are some early withdrawals. The variable annuities are a little bit different. They have a higher risk and obviously a higher reward as well. But the variable annuities are invested in various types of investment instruments, such as the stock market, obviously, or bonds and things of that nature. And the interest rate is tied to the investment portfolio. So the payout, unlike a fixed annuity, is not necessarily guaranteed as to the same amount that a fixed annuity would be. So it's variable based upon how this underlying investment performs. But like other annuities, there's some cost behind it. There's not much flexibility. There are certain benefits where you get a step up in these certain different instruments if you allow for it, which is certainly a benefit. But this is someone, if they're looking for a fixed income, this is not an optimal solution. And again, some of the negatives here is that they can have some higher fees and generate significant taxes if not appropriately planned. And they tend to be somewhat complex. I mean, I used to do these annuities back in the 90s, and some of the benefits have disappeared because the insurance companies, let's just say, they got smarter about how to position these. So it's kind of a moving target. And then lastly, just the index annuities, right? And these are a lot of insurance agents tend to sort of cater or at least bring these instruments into the older population, if you will, as a combination of a fixed annuity and a variable annuity. They're out of me sitting down with 20, 30 different clients and them having these types of instruments, 99% of them, unfortunately, don't understand how they work.
Understandable.
Yeah, because there's a lot of moving parts there. These basically are tied into again, they have a fixed bucket, but they also are, the appreciation is tied to certain indexes like the S&P. But as a result, the index annuity can rise higher than a fixed annuity. And there's some potential upside, but more importantly, you're kind of capped on the upside as well. So it's kind of the give and take on that. But there are also minimum rate guarantees on here as well, that if all of a sudden that index does go down, let's say 5-10%, you're never going to be really jeopardizing your principal, right? So if you put 100,000 in, the S&P goes down 10%. Well, what the insurance company will say is we're still going to give you worst case scenario 1%, right? So in particular instances, it works because it at least gives you some potential upside, whereas it preserves your capital. But the negatives of these is that they have extremely large sales commissions, unfortunately, yes, for the advisor, and the lockup periods could be 7 to 10 years. And I've seen annuities where somebody has 100,000, they come to me, they had it for a year, and they literally have to pay $9,000 in back end sales charges in order to get out of this annuity. So again, those are some of the negatives and higher expense, things like that.
Just two questions that arise for me from this, Roman. In the instance of variable annuities, people really need to understand, do they not, that if they've planned their retirement, that this annuity is going to deliver, I'm making up an amount now, $500 per month. That's not necessarily so with a variable annuity. That's the difference between fixed and variable. And in the case of the indexed annuities, I understand that the downside's protected, but you really need to be dealing with someone reputable or who is managing your whole portfolio, it would seem to me, because of all literally the ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, that needs to be expressly written in there. This is a contract that your downside's protected to the tune of a specific index, that it's benchmarked to that index. These are very complex products, and as you mentioned earlier, and I'm not speaking for or against, different strokes for different folks, but indexed annuities require someone to really explain them to you carefully. Is that not a fair statement?
Yeah, they really are, and this is the concern that we have within utilizing these sort of investments, is that majority of them are, if you invest with somebody, this is what we've seen, and this is why we're not big proponents of them, is that if somebody invests in this, right? Say you get an advisor, they buy $100,000. Now they get paid 9, sometimes 10% of that. And what happens is they get compensated. Unlike a fiduciary, they have no additional obligation of, to your point, relooking at that annuity to make sure over the next 9, 10 years that you're stuck in there to readjust those types of investments internally. So I almost feel like who benefits here, and I hate using this, is the advisor, right? Because they put these instruments out there. So in my career, I've done probably one, and it was more of an inherited estate that actually occurred, that happened with some of this stuff. So again, very complex to your point. Understand the facts. Make sure the person that's recommending it to you explains it thoroughly, and it's a constant explanation, not just a one-time.
And is fitting it in with the rest of your other financial goals. One last comment on that, if I may make this. Back in the 90s, where you and I were involved in these kinds of things, the big issues of which were front-end loaded and which were back-end loaded, and they've evolved even to greater complexity. What about taxation? How are these instruments taxed?
Yeah, and you know, I know we sort of spoke briefly around it, but the drawback of a lot of these is that, you know, for us, it's ultimately how do we control the tax risk, right? When we're looking at retirement planning and things like that, these unfortunate types of instruments that they don't have as much flexibility, right? Whenever you invest money into it, you put 100,000, it becomes 150. And when you start taking the money out, and you forget about annuitizing just for a second, what occurs is that 50,000 comes out as ordinary income, right? So you don't have any real flexibility around it. If you annuitize the contract, it may look a little bit different, right? Because then you may have some return of principal and also some appreciation as well coming out, a part of the principal coming out of it as well. But again, it's kind of a one-off where you have to really factor in the taxes before you start taking money out.
The term annuitized, what does that mean? The term once an annuity is annuitized. That seems to be almost a redundant statement. Annuity is annuitized. Right. My birthday is another year. What does that mean, though, technically?
Yeah. So to us, right, and again, me doing this for 25 years, I'm not a big proponent of annuitization. So if somebody invests into annuity, you have the option of either annuitizing it, where you're So let's just say you put $100,000 in. 20 years later, it becomes 300,000. Okay. Now the insurance company comes back to you and says, well, you now have the option of taking those funds out, or you could annuitize it. If you annuitize it, you're basically losing control of your assets. The insurance company now says, okay, if you're going to annuitize this contract, we're going to take that 300,000 from you. And it becomes almost like an irrevocable gift to the insurance company. Again, they have control, and they're going to say, okay, now you're 78 years old, whatever age may be. We're going to give you income for the rest of your life. Now, you could choose it based upon your life. You could choose it based upon your life with your life with your wife as something happens to you, or you could base it on a 10, 15, 20 years, different variations of this certain. So again, I've been doing this and I've had annuities. I've yet to personally annuitize a contract because I always feel like, what if the client needs money for nursing home care? What if something happens where you need to get those funds back? The insurance company, you can't, correct.
Wow.
So that's a concern for us.
Well, that's great. You are helping. Well, you're helping me personally, but that's not why we're here. You are helping our listeners and the people that need the kind of services that you provide. Now, what's your opinion on inheriting these kinds of contracts and assets, I should say?
Yeah. So they're not the most friendly types of assets to inherit. So I'll give you an example. If you own a house or if you own stocks, and let's just say you buy a house for $300,000, you sell it for $1 million, 15, 20 years later, you get a step up in basis, right? Your kids get a step up in basis. And so you're basically something.
You've mentioned that several times. Could you explain that to our listeners? A step up in basis.
Yes. So basically what happens is if I purchase a house for $300,000, okay, fast forward 25 years later, I pass away and the house is worth $1 million.
Sure. Okay.
Now, my kids, in this particular instance, if they sell the house upon my demise, they sell it for $1 million, the market value, they pay no capital gains on that property because it's as if they purchased the house at $1 million and not 300.
I see.
So that gap from 300 to 700, the kids don't pay any taxes on that. So, there's a lot of debate within Congress to remove that. We don't think it's going to happen because it would just be an utter nightmare. So in annuities, applying that same example, let's say you buy an annuity for $300,000, and now fast forward 25 years later, it's worth $1 million. Well, my kids would inherit that $1 million annuity. Now, with this particular case, they would have to pay $700,000 of ordinary income on that appreciation. So they would not get the step up in basis there.
I see.
To us, that's an unfortunate part because stocks, you get a step up in basis as well. You buy Apple at $20, it's worth 170. Your basis is 170.
Yes, right. Okay. That's really good. That's very useful. Thank you so much. Now, very insightful. Clearly, there are many moving parts when it comes to this type of investment vehicle. Any parting thoughts you want to share about annuities?
Yeah, I know we always emphasize this, and it's a matter of getting not only advice, but about the right advice, about having somebody that's objective, being a fiduciary, really assessing your own specific needs, and understand the fees, the expenses, the contingent sales charges before purchasing these types of instruments. They may sound different, but until you really peel back and understand how they work, it's important. Circumstances change, and if used, if you want to make annuities something that complements the portfolio, we feel that it could certainly do that. But don't get into a situation where we've had clients come in or prospects where they have a $2 million and 99% of their net worth is tied to these annuities, and there's zero flexibility around it. So look to diversify beyond the annuity aspect of it.
One last comment by me, and maybe get another last or reaction by me and a comment by you. It seems to me, and I realize this is what you do, but this is evolving naturally from me, to look at annuity or any one type of investment strategy that didn't take into account your insurance, your home, your children, and other things. All of this needs to be done together. Makes each of these things, it seems to me, much more relevant.
Yeah, no, you're right. And this is the part where when somebody comes in here and they really try to take control of their whole financial lives, there's so many different silos, and everything, to your point, having this roadmap and a financial plan, ultimately these pieces need to speak to each other, right? And it's having that relationship with the accountant and then your spheres of influence and your family members as to what ultimately makes sense. Estate planning, things change, but it's to your point, putting all the pieces together and making sure it's a cohesive strategy from a longer term point of view. Because, like we say, is you want to have control. Taxes, we don't know what that's going to look like 5, 10 years or 20 years down the road, right? The estate law, we don't really know what that will look like. So putting this together and having a longer term sort of viewpoint is very important.
Well, I want to thank you, Roman Ciosek, Managing Director, Partner at Hightower Westchester. Thank you very, very much. This has been very informative.
Thank you, Bob, as always. Appreciate your time.
Always.
HighTower Westchester is a group of investment professionals registered with HighTower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with HighTower Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through HighTower Securities, LLC. Advisory services are offered through HighTower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is not indicative of current or future performance and is not a guarantee. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data and information referenced herein are from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other information contained in this research is provided as a general market commentary. It does not constitute investment advice. Hightower Westchester and Hightower shall not in any way be liable for claims and make no expressed or implied representations or warranties as to the accuracy or completeness of the data and other information, or for statements or errors contained in or omissions from the obtained data and information referenced herein. The data and information are provided as of the date referenced. Such data and information are subject to change without notice. This podcast was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of Hightower Westchester and do not represent those of HighTower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates. HighTower Advisors do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented to any entity as tax advice or tax information. Tax laws vary based on the client's individual circumstances and can change at any time without notice. Clients are urged to consult their tax or legal advisor before establishing a retirement plan.